Wonderful. Well, good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Been looking forward to spending some time with you guys and sharing what I've been learning. We're going to talk about thriving organizations and the lessons I've learned about what the best organizations are doing differently than the rest of us. And I want to start off with some reflection and let you know that there'll be a few opportunities throughout where I'm going to pause and give you a chance to think a little bit and to take a few notes. In fact, there'll be one moment where we'll actually draw a picture together. So if you don't have some note-taking and even potentially a pen or pencil where you can scribble on something just briefly, I think there'll be some good interaction here. But I want to start with a reflection question for you. Think of an organization that you consider to be thriving. Why them? I mean, there are some in every space, whether we're talking about sports teams to business, to artists groups. Some organizations get together and manage not just to have moments of success, but sustained excellence, to outperform those around them in the similar space doing similar things. This has been a question that has driven me for decades. And I've spent many, many years and many, many trips all over the globe listening, studying, collecting notes, and then attempting it simultaneously, not just a distant observer, but attempting it myself. I've started 4 organizations. I've worked for tech startups as well as multi-billion-dollar international companies. And so I've had a lot of opportunity to play with this while learning, while at the same time diving into this whole space to say, okay, what are you doing? And then how do I apply it? And how do I see others applying it? This journey of learning and application has really, really driven some interesting insights for me. And so what I want to share with you today are some, yes, principles, but as much as possible, some real practices to say, okay, this is not just a nice idea, but here's what it actually looks like on the ground. And I'll tell you that when we did the final version of this that turned into a lot of this presentation today, my team did not just take theories. Here's the general process we used. We went and studied what the best did in multiple fields, and we created hundreds of pages of notes on best practices. What are they actually doing? And then we began to cluster these notes into themes and groupings and say, hey, these are all similar ways of doing the same thing. And we began to put labels and heading and develop some principles out of this. And then in the process, we took these back to 2 groups, and we did a test group and a control group, like a classic scientific experiment, and said, okay, we're going to have these groups try these things, and we're going to monitor them deeply. And we're going to have this set of group who's very similar space. All of them were at least a few paired with one of our test groups, same industry, even same market, same place in the world, same city, so that there were as much as possible comparisons. And we said, what actually happens when the test group makes these changes in behavior? And then we actually modified it around further. This is not the final version from there. Like, based on that test group, I went ahead and created one more version that said, okay, here are the ones that actually had the most significant impact. Here's the practical implications of trying these. So what you're going to get is not a theory that I've never tested. It's a theory I've tested again and again, and rigorously, scientifically, as much as possible, said, okay, here's what actually drives performance and behavior in a variety of industries. So thriving organizations. I'm going to start with a high-level overview and give you the 4 big buckets of today, and then we're going to drill down into each of them, and I'm going to give you the 3 most impactful best practices for that area. So the first area is that thriving organizations invest in their leaders. I mean, there simply was no way around it. We actually did, part of the test is we had a group of folks that had not done much investment in leaders, had not had leadership teams or structures, and they attempted to make these behaviors, and there was a significant difference between those who did invest in their leaders, and I'll talk about specifically what that means in a minute, and those who didn't. But at the end of the day, it just keeps coming back up again in the studies, mine and many others, that would say you simply don't have thriving organizations without thriving leaders. There's just no way around it. It's not the whole picture. It's only one of 4 here, but it is one of the essential pictures. So the next piece is that thriving organizations align vision and action. There is an alignment in the organization where we're all actually aiming for the same thing. And there's an alignment between the action and the vision, where it actually translates into behaviors, day-to-day operational things that make sense and line up. And again, I'll unpack specifically what that looks like, but this is a deliberate, purposeful priority to say we are going to pursue alignment and make sure that we are all together. It is not a natural thing, alignment. The third is engaging the whole person. We found that the thriving organizations went above and beyond or took some unusual paths to engage aspects of their workers, of their employees, that they're more than the minimum, more than just, hey, you're an analyst, we need your brain. Hey, you're a laborer on a plant, we need your muscles. We wanted to engage on a whole other level and what that looks like. And so we'll talk about the different ways they engage and the different benefits you get when you bring more than just the minimum assumed skill to the table. And then finally, they pursued excellence, not success. And I'm going to define the difference here for us just briefly, and then we're going to come back to this in much more depth. But excellence is my performance compared to my potential, whereas success is my performance compared to others' performance. And we found that those who are not thriving, those who are average, who were fine and succeeding, we weren't looking at the ones who were failing the most. We were comparing them to just people that were fine, but had failed to really step above the crowd or achieve exceptional results. And we found that they were mostly concerned about the others around them. But when we looked at the thriving organizations, they ironically, even though they were the best in their field and probably had the most incentive to compare themselves to everyone around them, it would have felt very good. Their actual response was, hey, we know we're capable of so much more. We could be better. And here's all of the ways we are diligently, systematically pursuing improving our own internal excellences based on what we could, based on our potential, our possibility. Whether or not the world is giving us lots of awards, we just know we could do better. And how do we do that deliberately and systematically? At the end of the day, if you don't execute well, you don't thrive. So again, great organizations, the ones that stand above, they do extra things to invest in their leaders. They take extra steps to align their vision and action. They go out of their way to engage the whole person. And they have a systematic, diligent, above and beyond pursuit of excellence. Well, let's dive into these and talk about what actually this looks like. Again, my promise is not theory, but practice. So let's begin by talking about some of this with investing in their leaders. How do they actually do that? So in each of these areas, I'm going to pull up 3 best practices that we saw that really made a significant difference. And the first is what I call leaders grow first. A little bit of a play off of leaders go first, the kind of classic leadership thing. You're the one out leading the way. Well, yes, but in this case, what we found is that if there was a division or an organization that was growing and the leaders were thriving, the top leader of that division was putting deliberate effort into their own growth process. There just simply was no way around this. They could not be asking everyone else to be growing and investing in themselves and have leaders who were trying to get better without a leader who exhibited that mentality. Every single time we found a leader who said, oh, I'm fine, but everyone else needs this, we found their leaders were undergrowing, underperforming, underinvesting in themselves. Every time we found a leader who said, oh, I am working on my growth and doing so in a way that is visible to the rest of my team, then these things took off. And so I'll leave you with a specific tangible piece in each one of these to try to give you some sense of like, how will you know if this is actually working for you? And the critical piece here is, do you have a written growth plan? It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be an Excel spreadsheet with 6 tabs of details. But if you don't have some form of written growth plan, you can't say that you are being very deliberate and leading here. That was the marker, the behavior that we found a massive proportion of these people working in. Now, To get really tactical with you, a written growth plan could quite simply be as at least 3 simple elements. What is the area I'm working on growing? Like, I generally want to get better as a leader. Not good enough. I mean, nice, but that's a sentiment, not a plan. So what exactly am I working on? Is it my communication? Is it my vision casting? Is it my own discipline? Is it holding people accountable? What are the things as a leader that I am working on improving? That's the first piece. The second is, how will I know when I get better? What's my measure of success or goal or marker or milestone? How will I know when I actually reach that accomplishment and have gotten better? So what am I working on, and what will it look like when it succeeds? And then the third piece is, what am I actually doing to improve myself? Again, if you leave this last piece out, we just have an aspiration. Gee, I hope I somehow get better as a communicator. Well, I hope you do too, I guess, but what are you actually doing about that? Are you reading a book? Have you engaged a coach? Are you going to a conference? More valuably than just getting information, where are the speaking opportunities? Are you signing up for a chance to present? Or is this one-on-one communication? Which are the meetings that you're going to try to work on this? What is the practical way you're going to go about this? And again, this could be quite simple. It could be a little note scribbled by hand. It could be a digital file that you tap into one of your phone apps to kind of keep your heads up on this. But if you don't have a written version of this, and this is what I'm working on during this season, you can't say that you are leading the way in growing yourself. And that doing that and then making that visible to your team so that they know about it and they can see about it, that sets you up and sets your team up to say, this is how we lead. And this is critical. I'm spending a little extra time on this one before we move on, because if you don't lead this way as a learner and as a grower yourself, you've just put a ceiling on the rest of the group in the organization. Everyone who reports to you and your whole slice of the organization is limited by your own lack of visible growth. So do this and find a way to make it visible to your team. You'll then have set yourself up to ask them to do this. Well, the next thing we see in investing in their leaders is that these leaders did not attempt to lead alone. This was one of the key markers. We did all these various tests and control groups, and every time we attempted to make major changes without a leadership team, that organization could not do it until they stopped and went back and said, I'm sorry, we've got to build a leadership team. There are just too many pieces and parts and complexities to this for one leader, no matter how brilliant or diligent they are, to do this themselves. And critical thing here, what's the difference between a true leadership team and a group of top-level delegators, delegatees that you delegate to, is, do they help you make the hard decisions? Or are you making all the hard decisions yourself and then just telling them how to execute? A true leadership team, and there can be a whole discussion on what this looks like, but a true leadership team, the marker of behavior is, are you having meetings in which you, as a group, they help speak into and help you make the final decisions? That's not to say you're not still the leader, that there's not still a need for a senior leader on the team. But if they're not involved in that discussion, if they don't get to carry some of the load and wrestle with some of the big decisions, then they're not really co-leading with you. They're just really senior doers, not true thinking leaders. So if a true leadership team helps carry the leadership load, not just the task load. And then the last piece we saw is that there was a deliberate effort in these great organizations to build their bench. Now that's a bit of a sports metaphor, so just in case this doesn't translate across cultures, in the typical sports conversation here in the United States, you've got the starting players that are out on the field or the court, and they're doing their thing. And if you've got a team, you've got players who have been practicing, developing, working on their skills. They're ready to go, but they don't start the game. They sit on what we call the bench on the sideline, waiting for their turn, just in case somebody needs a break or an injury happens. You can send in your players off the bench. In the great organizations, what we actually found was not only did they have, for every major critical role of leader, a backup player, a person that's being mentored that could be ready to step in the role. We actually found, then this was fascinating, a stated goal to have 3 deep: the leader, the leader's backup, and the backup to that person as well, all in process for every role. We found deliberate, systematic organizations where they get together and have conversations and say, okay, who's the successor and who's that successor's successor? Do we have 3 deep layers of people that we're developing? Programs specifically to say, how are we going to train them? Mentoring arrangements, coaching opportunities, conferences, a whole set of activities around saying, okay, how do we identify them? Do we know what they look like? And are we doing something to develop them? A systematic program. If you are hoping, crossing your fingers and hope and saying, gee, I really hope this just works out and these people are ready when the time comes, that's not it. If you don't have a systematic written plan to identify what you're looking for and find a way to grow them faster than normal, then you're not actively building your bench. You're waiting for your bench to come to you. So these are the behaviors that we found that distinguished those who are thriving from those who are just getting by. They deliberately went out of their way to invest in their leaders. They grew the self first and made that visible. They forged a real team of thinking, decision-making leaders, and they had a program, a practice, some written specific plan to say, how are we going to find and build a set of successors to our leaders? Now, I mentioned the reflection times. We're going to do this at the end of each of these sections, and I just want to give you a moment on your own. Again, we're going to have Q&A time, question and answer to process later, but right now, I just want you to think of yourself, just off the top of your head, 1 to 5, rate yourself on your organization. 5 is excellent. We are flourishing, and we've got all 3 of those activities going on in our own way, and it looks wonderful. 1 being, wow, we're not doing any of that. We're not even talking about that stuff. We're just doing life, and that hasn't come up. So what's your gut number? And then the question I will leave you with, that could be a long, rich conversation in another setting, is what would it look like to even just get 1 better? So maybe going all the way to 5 right now, and maybe you can, but maybe it's like we're at a 2. Well, what would even a 3 look like in the next 3 to 6 months? What could you do to make that happen? So this is a moment for you just to think and pause, and I'm going to move on to the next. And again, more questions at the end. We can process this. So again, they invest in their leaders. Thriving organizations deliberately find ways to grow their leaders because the leaders set the ceiling for the rest of this. But they also align vision and action. Now, alignment is difficult and unnatural and harder to do, but we're going to have a little fun with this. So if you've got something to write with, this is the artistic portion of the presentation. So bear with me for a minute, and I'm going to go through this. We're going to make a rough sketch together and have fun because I have a vision, and I'm going to share with you my vision for a bug. Yes, literally like an insect that crawls on the ground bug. And I'm going to describe my vision in 11 detailed bullet points here, and they're fairly simple. As I list one, start drawing, and we're going to see if we can't draw a shared bug. We're going to practice alignment here. So get ready for a bit of art here at the end of your day. All right, so the bug is round. So let's start with a round bug, and leave a little room. Don't make this too tiny. I'm going to fill in a bunch of details as we go. So draw a round bug. All right, the bug has 8 legs. These are grouped in pairs with 4 on the left and 4 on the right. So again, give you a second here. 8 legs, pair them up, 4 left, 4 right. So as you're drawing your legs on your round bug here, I want to point out that the pairs, 1 leg is longer than the other. So extend some of your legs if you haven't. Give you 1 more second for that one. All right, the bug has 2 eyes on the top of the body. So now we're adding some eyes up there. You've got 8 legs, some longer, got some eyes on the top. All right, the bug also has 2 squiggly antennas. So put some wiggly squiggly antennas up there. All right, the bug also has 2 pea pod shaped wings. A better term might be crescent-like wings, sort of. They're sort of rounded crescents if pea pods don't translate to your space, but that's a common vegetable here. All right, the bug also has a spot next to each wing. So put a spot next to these kind of rounded crescent pea pod wings. All right, the bug has a triangular stinger on the bottom of the body. So now, in addition to our wings, our spots, we're putting a triangular stinger, so triangle stinger. All right, the bug has 2 feelers, like little bit footies on the end of each foot. So that the long legs and foots, you got feelers there. And again, one of these is longer, and they both stick out from the same side of the leg. So 2 feelers on each foot, Two little pokey things coming off. One is longer than the other, and they both come from the same side. We're almost to the end. The bug's got a round mouth. Put it between the two eyes. So round mouth between the eyes. I know I'm moving quick, but we're almost done. The bug has laid 5 square eggs. This is a rare species, lays square eggs to the left of the stinger. Okay, so here's our bug. Let's see how we're doing. If you've scribbled and kept up, I know I moved quick, but hopefully your bug looks something like this. So I can't see your bugs at this point, but I have actually done this exercise with thousands of people in workshops and leadership team retreats for years now. And let me tell you, here's the interesting point. I have never seen anybody draw this exact bug. I've given this same set of detailed descriptions, and you'd think, gosh, that's the key, right? Alignment. We've got to get real specific on how we tell our vision and communicate everything. And I still have never gotten, I've gotten close. I've gotten people who get sort of close, but never exactly this. And there's a couple of interesting points in this. Alignment is hard, really hard. And we often think, oh, the solution is that we just have to be much more detailed in our communication. That if we would just get it right this one time, and we could just have the perfect delivery, it will work. And it simply has never, in my over 2 decades of studying this, it has never worked. There is no way to singularly communicate one time and get it just right. The only way to get alignment is to repeat it again and again and again. To show the picture, have them draw, compare, try again, make an adjustment, try again, make an adjustment, try again. Alignment comes through repeated, continual communication. You simply don't get to do one great alignment, vision casting, brilliant moment, and then go back to regular life. People are just what happens in their mind. There is always translation. What does pea pod shaped mean to you? What are feelers? Squiggly. How exactly long are the antennas? There are so many little things that no matter how precisely I define this, there's simply no way to do it. The second is that sometimes you need to communicate in multiple forms and fashions. The list of details, that's very helpful, but it's not quite as helpful as an actual picture. And there are sometimes when we try to give people the vision for our organization and we list out the numbers. And you know what? We should probably list out some numbers. Finances are, kind of critical. But at the same time, sometimes we need to draw a picture, tell a story, maybe even bring music into the picture. There's a whole conversation about this. How do we give them physically a chance to walk around and taste it and feel it themselves, not just see it from a distance? What would it look like for them to tell the stories themselves and get involved? What's the emotional impact, not just the financial? All of these features come into alignment, and it is a long process. So what do the people do who actually get this right, who actually have alignment figured out? First of all, they create clarity. In fact, one of the studies we found, and one of my mentors, Marcus Buckingham, wrote a book called The One Thing. And he talks about the one thing leaders and managers and individual career people need to know. And in there, he says of a leader, if leaders only do one thing right, they have to create clarity. And we found this time and time again. It is absolutely essential. What is important and what isn't important? What will it look like when we actually succeed? What's the actual picture? There is a repeated, deliberate process for doing this. In fact, let me give you the one behavioral marker that we found that made such a difference. Great leaders talked about the vision, the goal, the boundaries, the values, how we're going to do this. They talked about what mattered to the organization at least once a month. We found that vision, as Bill Hybels, international bestselling author on leadership, Courageous Leadership is one of his books, he said, vision leaks. It's like you have a bucket and you fill their vision bucket, but everyone's vision bucket is leaky. Life comes along and bumps the bucket. We've got little cracks and holes, and it's hard to keep focused on all that. And bit by bit, the vision we filled them up with leaks away. We have to continually keep refilling the bucket. We have to continually create clarity. So if you are not, and again, in different forms, different fashions, you don't just repeat the same talk every time, send the same email. But if you don't have some reference and return back to what matters most, at least once a month, then your people begin to forget. In fact, what we found is that in many of these thriving organizations, the people actually would roll their eyes and sigh and can finish the sentence of the leader. And it was almost a half joke, like, okay, yes, the vision, the important part of organization is blah, blah, blah. That's actually, if they're not doing that, you're probably not doing it enough. That's when you know you've got it right. Okay, so interesting little moment. You don't have to do this. Nobody's looking over your shoulder. But man, if you want to test your clarity right now, I challenge you to pull out your phone. And yes, in the middle of the presentation, you could do it right now, or of course you could do it later if you want, or not at all. But text 3 of your employees and text them something like, what do you think is my top priority for our work right now? And then just see what answers they get. A bonus version, don't just ask the leaders that report to you, skip all the way down to maybe the front line or the direct employees or a layer or 2 below you and see if the message is getting all the way down. Because it's one thing we found is a lot of the mediocre organizations, the leader and his direct reports of leaders, they would talk about clarity, but it didn't cascade down to the rest of the organization. So find out what's going on. Interesting story. I did this once in a workshop, and a business owner texted her staff, and she got back and said, how did it go? And she said, well, I actually texted 5 people because they all kept giving me the exact same answer. And I said, congratulations. And she said, yes, the problem is none of them gave the answer that's actually my top priority. They're all aligned on the wrong vision. So what's happening in your organization? The second here is to select perfect fits. This is a bit of a counterintuitive reality, but the truth is if you want alignment, it's actually critical that you only select people that are already aligned with some of the big pictures. It is far more difficult to change people's value system and what they care about and the way they see the world and work and what they actually want to do. It's so much harder to change that in people than it is to just simply find people who already have a lot of the same passions. Now, perfect fit doesn't mean perfect people, because I have yet to run across somebody who is truly perfect. They all have areas to grow in, myself included. We're all still in process, but we can find people if you know what's clear. There's a bit of a sequence here. If you know what matters most to you, if you know what's most essential for the job, then you can select people who already care about that and already have the, maybe they need the technical skills training, sure, but they already have the heart and the mindset that says, I would want to do this, that this matters to me as well. So the selection process is, in these organizations, ridiculously intense. Ridiculously intense. And we could go into a whole discussion on what they do, but if you don't have an exceptionally intense selection process, then you don't really have a process to find perfect fits. If your process looks like everyone else in your industry, then you're probably not doing what the thriving organizations are. And then the last is this: highlight your heroes. Too often when we deal with alignment and vision and getting people to get their actions to actually match what we want them to do, the way we go about doing it is finding who's out of line and hitting them, putting reprimands and problems and poking at the ones who are doing it wrong. And not saying we shouldn't hold people accountable, but we tend to underutilize, especially in the mediocre organizations. They were doing little to nothing around this, and the thriving organizations put most of their effort into this. Don't underestimate the power of honoring people. For the honor of their peers, for the honor of those in their own society and organization, men across the ages have done remarkable things to gain honor, to protect their honor, to preserve honor. Men still to this day are willing to die for their honor. The power of honor in a society of peers is way underestimated. It is so much more than most organizations realize. Thriving organizations have a deliberate, systematic program. So my question for you behaviorally: who is assigned? Who is the actual leader in your organization assigned? The job description includes finding leaders who are doing well, finding workers who are living out your vision and taking the right actions, and how they make heroes out of them in your organization. If you don't have an actual person who their job is assigned to do this on a regular basis and have some deliberate way of putting this out into the organization and calling attention, then you're not acting like the thriving organizations. Thriving organizations align vision and action. Again, let's just take a quick second here and give you a chance to say, okay, how are we doing? What's your initial gut reaction? 1 to 5, what's your organization? And again, the question I want to leave you with is, what would it look like to get even just 1 better? So great organizations invest in their leaders. They align vision and action, and they engage the whole person. They don't just do the minimum. So here's a set of questions for you to think about. We don't have time to actually have discussion deeply on this, but I want to leave you with this as something that you could take back to your team, and you and your leadership team could talk about this. Who's your most engaged worker and your least engaged worker? And let me define engaged. I don't mean most talented. Notice question 5. We'll come back to that, but that's about talent. No, engaged is the one who is giving it their best. They care the most. They're trying the hardest. They are most fully bought in and said, this matters to me and I'm doing I care the most, right? They're all levels, their mind, their heart, their body, they're giving the best they've got. And then what's the difference in how these people behave? And what's the difference on the people around them that work with that one person? And how different are this most engaged versus least engaged in terms of talent? What I've typically found is that the most talented are often not the most engaged. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And the most engaged often have the much, much better impact on the organizations than these high talent people who really just doing the minimum. So how do you actually get full engagement of your people? Well, the first piece is to build true community. I mean, real relationships. And this is one of the big myths that we saw in the mediocre organizations compared to the thriving organizations. Average leaders kept a impersonal separation and said, I am the high and mighty boss, and I will be professional and polite, but I do not want a personal relationship with my people. It is just too difficult. And here's the irony. It is actually much, much more work to lead people that you have real relationship, real community, real connection with. It's much harder. It just also gets you much better results when you have real relationships. Yes, it's much more work if you actually know these people and they're friendly with them, to hold them accountable. Oh, it's so much easier to hold somebody accountable that you don't have a personal relationship with. It is. But you're also going to get less honest conversation out of somebody who doesn't truly trust you and know you as a person. You're not going to be able to motivate them fully if you don't truly know them at a personal level. You're going to stay at a shallower, less powerful conversation and less powerful motivation. True community pays off big. When somebody is struggling, nobody can challenge them like a friend they trust. When somebody is succeeding, nobody can celebrate with them like a friend they trust. Everything is multiplied with real community. So here's the question. If you are not having some regular conversation about parts of their life that are not about work, if you don't know the names of their children or what they do for fun or the kinds of things that they care about in the world and why they even like their job, then you're not building real community. It doesn't have to be fuzzy and complicated. It just means regular, non-work conversation has to somehow be built into it. And this is key. You as the leader have to be open as much as they are. If you know the names of their kids, but they don't know the names of your kids, for example, then it's not true community. It's one-sided. So I'm not saying you have to be all-time best friends with them. I'm not saying that you can't have closer friends or keep some personal life personal. Of course you can. If you don't have any personal connection to your folks, then you're really not getting the best you can out of them. The next piece, empower decision makers. One of the great myths we see in the mediocre organization is that the leader believes their job is to make all the hard decisions. Now, the challenge is you do have often the most experience and sometimes even the most intelligence. You have the most raw ability, but the leader's job, we've heard this from the thriving organizations time and time again, the leader's job is not to make all the decisions. The leader's job, is to decide who decides. That is the one critical role of the top leader. Who is empowered with the decision? And if the answer is always you, then it's not a very good process. You are slowing the organization down. The single best way to get people to really engage is to give them the decision. Now, you can mentor them and monitor them. You should set boundaries around them. If there are budget or past lessons you learned. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into setting somebody up for a good decision. It's not just, hey, you make it and then you hope they don't blow everything. And if you cannot afford a mistake, then don't delegate that one decision. But there are so many decisions that you can probably pass off and oversee rather than do yourself. And it will get so much more involvement from your people. One of my mentors said, for every person you hire, for every pair of hands you hire, you get a free brain. You might as well use the brain. Another one of my mentors, Howard Behar, who is the former president of Starbucks International, he said that the person who is going to use the broom should choose the broom. The broom sweeper should be the broom chooser. So quick example, like he was literally saying, like, in our restaurants, we have brooms to clean the floors. Why are senior regional directors choosing what broom we're buying? Why are not the store people? Now, maybe you give them a range and give them a few options, and maybe your sourcing department finds some good broom options so that you get a good deal. But when it comes down to picking which one we match, like, does it matter the extra 50 cents per broom to get this extra handle? You don't know. The broom sweepers know best. Give them some engagement and they will care more and probably make at least as good decision, if not a better one. If you're making all the hard decisions, then it's bad. If you're making the easy decisions, that's bad. You should be empowering decision makers. Don't just build doers, build decision makers. And I don't just mean with your leaders, across the whole organization. You don't have to be a manager or have supervisors to be able to make real decisions. Build true community, empower decision makers, and finally, foster dreams. And now what I mean by that is like their personal dreams. What do they hope for their own life? What are their wishes? What are their personal goals? It could be as simple as a financial goal. I want to reach this point and get to the point where I can purchase my own home for my family. It could be a grand dream of, I want to make a difference in the world with this cause and impact some part of a global society. It could be a very personal dream. I want to use this skill and be able to do this kind of creative work or strategic and analytical work that I've always loved. But if you don't know what their dream is, and if you can't show them how working for you in some way gets them a step closer to living out their dream, if not a lot, then you'll never get their full engagement. Now, the question we get here occasionally is, oh no, what if I ask about their dreams and their dream has nothing to do with our work? Like, well, let me tell you, that's a bigger risk in not knowing. You will never get full engagement of somebody who truly has a deep heart passion to do something completely unrelated from you. You probably need to know that now. You probably need to know that now so that you can help them off-ramp and go to that, and you can find somebody who actually does, at least in some way, have some connection to the work they're doing with you. Because what you'll end up with, if their dream is truly distant and you don't know, you'll end up with that, and maybe you have them right now, that confusing employee who has all the right skills to do the work, but never fully gives it their best. Never goes all the way, always seems to be holding something back and only doing the minimum. And no matter what you do, you can't figure out how to get them to buy in, because deep down, they don't care. They care deeply about something else. Stop wasting your time and their time and give them a chance to off-ramp and find somebody who really does care. Engage the whole person. Again, 1 to 5, what's your gut on this? Just take 1 second and rate yourself, and then again, be thinking, what would it look like to be even one better? I've got one last set, and then we're done here. Because great organizations not only do all these 3 things, they pursue excellence, not success. It was funny because when we started this whole process, they actually had this whole passion to say, we actually didn't notice it. First, they all kept saying, well, I don't know why you're studying us. We've got so much to work on. I don't know why we've got, and it was only after time that my team began to realize, oh, this is a pattern. Every one of the thriving organizations continually talks about how much more they have to get better. And we saw the ways that they pursued this diligently, that differently than the average organizations. First, they had a focus on the fundamentals. The mediocre or the average folks were really interested in the advanced strategies and the nuances. And honestly, even some of this today is like, oh, what? We should build great leaders and have a growth plan. Like, hey, where's the really cool nuanced strategy, right? Well, sometimes a simple thing like a written growth plan. Is it actually, do you have a real goal on your growth plan? How excellent is your growth plan? That's not a highly advanced thing. That doesn't take a 3-week retreat to figure out how to write a growth plan. It's a discipline. It's a fundamental. But this is what separated the best. That's not to say they didn't have some creative, innovative strategy, but I can tell you a lot of the mediocre organizations we found had some sort of innovative, cool approach, and it wasn't working. Not because they weren't innovative, because they did not have strong fundamentals. Basic customer service, basic communication, no downtime on their technology. I mean, they delivered the core smoother, faster, better. That's what actually made the biggest difference in excellence. They cared and talked about the tiniest things. They also went around and not only focused on the fundamentals, but they shared the score. There is a human instinct to get better and to grow the score and to exceed and develop. And too often the top leaders or maybe the leadership team are the only people who know how we're doing. Publicly posting the score for our division, for our area, so that everyone knows what's the division score and how are we doing. And maybe how's my team doing if my team's got a score and how we play into that. Huge impact in making the score visible. You don't even need to give a speech next to it. Human instinct just says, how are we going to raise that number? How are we going to get better? And too often we found mediocre organizations, the majority of them put the score in their pocket, so to speak. And they knew it, but they're the only ones that knew it. And they walked around trying to get everybody to try harder, but they were the only ones that saw whether their scores were getting better or not. Share the score. And the final piece is, man, they had a passion to convert ideas into action. Let's try that. We heard that 1,000 times in the thriving organizations. Let's just give it a try. Let's take an action on it. Okay, who's going to do that? The simple thing I'll leave you with here is that they would, and this, we saw this change mediocre organizations when they try this simple behavior. We would ask them to just use one of the techniques we saw, all this. Every meeting, have a flip chart or a note taker or a document, however you want to do this. And you just capture 3 things at the end of every idea conversation. You're not allowed to start a second conversation until you close out with this. Who is going to do what by when? If you don't have an action item with who, somebody assigned, what exactly will they be doing, and by when should it be completed, then your idea conversation is not finished. We found too many mediocre organizations would throw out a bunch of ideas and leave it vague, like, well, yeah, we should do something about that. Yeah, okay, let's look into that. What does look into that mean? Who exactly is we? By when will you want this thing to be done? Again, that's not advanced rocket science, but that powerful drive to let's convert this idea into actionable stuff makes all the difference. Again, 1 to 5, how is your organization at pursuing excellence, not success? This is what the excellent leaders did. They invested in their leaders. They aligned vision and action. They engaged the whole person. They pursued excellence, not success. And I leave you with the question, how would you know if this was happening in your organization? What is not just surviving, what does thriving look like for you? All right, so we're going to pause here and do some Q&A time and have you guys got some chance to ask some questions. This is what we do. We help organizations. So we're in the middle of doing this, from coaching to retreats. And there's my contact information. Would love to talk with you further if we don't get to your questions in time. And yes, of course, I've got a book on Amazon called How to Fail as a Leader. It is an action adventure fable. That means it's kind of a fictional medieval kingdom with sword fights and catapults. And fair warning, not all of the characters will make it to the end of the book alive. So it's a high adventure, high action book. But mixed in all of that are some rich leadership lessons that based on all the mistakes I made in my early days as a leader. So yeah, if we can help, would love to help. And we'll start today with some Q&A time. And so I'm going to give it back to you guys here. And there we are. And see if we can share this back. So I'm going to, yeah, we can do it this way. I guess I can keep the screen up like this, but yeah, ready to do this.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Scott. And folks, we are now open for question and answer. So if you have any questions, you could either insert it in the question box, or you could equally raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on the webinar console. Please click on it if you want to speak directly with Scott. But let me go to the question box. There are a couple of them posted. There's a question. There's more than one improvement I would like to implement. Where would you recommend I start first?
Yeah, so there's a lot here. In terms of sequence, the first thing that we typically find makes the biggest difference is create clarity. Do you actually know what is the most important things for you? And I'll define that on 3 levels. What exactly should we get clear about? So are we clear on why we exist, like what we care about most? What's the universal driving purpose or vision? There's a lot of language for this in kind of the leadership management consulting field, and they all have their own name for it. And I don't really frankly care whether you call it your vision statement, purpose statement, mission statement. But it's the big why. Start with why. Do people know why we exist, why we matter, how we make the world a better place, how we make somebody's life better? And it's a grand why. And there's a human instinct to be tied into that at a deep level. And if you don't know some why, name that. The next is a what. What are you actually trying to accomplish? And that's a measurable goal. Jim Collins and his team, they call this a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. SMART goals come into this. It's a classic acronym for specific, measurable, aggressive, realistic, and time-bound goals. I mean, real defined, a charging cry to say, okay, we exist to make the world better in this way. And in this period, for this next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 6 months, whatever your goal is, this is what this is what it'll look like. And the big why has a never-ending period. Like, I'm always going to try to help the world this way. But the goal is very specifically like, we got to get to this point, and this is how we'll know if we've hit this mark. So it's very measurable. And then the last piece on this is values or methods. It's your how. How are we going to go about doing it? And the mistake I think a lot of people make in the values category is that they pick generic values. I'll give you an example. Integrity. We want honesty and integrity. Man, I love that. Of course you want honesty and integrity. The problem is, so does everybody else. And that's good. And I think we should all value integrity. But I've yet to run across the organization that's like, yeah, you know, we don't care if you're a bunch of liars and cheats. Like, bring it. Yeah, we like cheaters. It's great. Everybody likes integrity. I would say that's more of a foundational, universal value. What I'm talking about are what makes us unique values. Not everybody shares these things. So some organizations, man, the work you do, you should be all about precision and carefulness and caution and moving very deliberately to have like near 100% reliability in your organization. Well, some organizations, the opposite is true. You want people who are aggressive and creative and innovative and willing to try things that whether or not they work. Neither of those is morally superior to the other, but they are situationally better suited. They're more like personality traits, like introvert versus extrovert. That's what organizations should figure out. And if your workers don't know what makes us unique, what's our unique personality style, and where is the goal we're heading towards, and why does this even matter? And what am I supposed to do today, this week, this month that might actually make a contribution toward that goal? Like, so many of the rest of what we're talking about here hangs on clarity. How you select leaders, what decisions you should let go of and what not. What are the fundamentals of so much of the things begin with, how clear are you? And I guess I would say the next piece in this is not just how clear are you, but how clear is everyone else in your organization? Because I can't tell you how many times, I mean, literally over 100 times I've worked with organizations, and we've run this survey, and you find out that the leader is really clear. His leadership team's pretty on page. They know a lot of the same stuff. And every time you go down a layer in the organization, you lose a massive amount of clarity. And people are like, I actually don't know anymore. Oh yeah, no, I think it's this, and it's not. So clarity, clarity, clarity. So much hinges on clarity. I don't know that it's more important in the long run. Like the other things matter. If you're clear and then you never work on it, that's bad, right? But if you're not clear first, at least sequentially, then it's really going to be hard to do a lot of these other things. So that's probably the first piece I would tackle.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a caller raise a hand. Let me go, Mr. Brother Muhammad Fatani. Brother Muhammad Fatani, could you introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yes, sir. Hi, Mr. Scott.
Hi.
Well, actually, I have a couple of questions, but let me start with this kind of semi question. Are you actually in Medina, or you're in the U.S.?
So I'm based in the U.S. I do travel internationally. I've done work on all 6 continents. I haven't yet made it to Antarctica. Not a lot of leadership development work there, but I do travel all over the place. So.
Perfect. Right. We look forward to hosting you here. I'm actually in Saudi Arabia. I'm Saudi, and was born and raised in Jeddah, which is not very far from Medina. And yeah. So we really look forward to having you and hosting in our country. I lived in the States for 11 years, and let me just dive into the 2 questions right away, so I can leave some chance for the other attendees.
Sure.
But Mr. Scott, my first question is to you, sir. So I've heard of a book that I did not get a chance to read. It's called, I think, correct me if I'm mistaken, this is your field, this is your expertise. It's called Jesus Christ as a CEO.
Yes.
Yeah. Like I said, I didn't get a chance, but I mean, the name is just fascinating, and I can already anticipate some of the things that will be in the book. And in here, I mean, I'm Muslim in the faith, and I'm pretty sure that also people talked about the Prophet Muhammad. As they talked about Prophet Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. So my question to you, I mean, I've read a little bit about your biography, and it's really astonishing, and I did enjoy it and learned a lot about today's lecture. So thank you for that. So I read about your biography, and by the way, I'm an employee here in Wizrat al-Sahafiya in the Ministry of Health. I'm actually in Riyadh. I just got recruited, so I relocated from Jeddah to Riyadh, and I'm currently actually in. So we finished at 4 p.m. and fortunately, your lecture just started right after work.
That worked out great.
Exactly. So the first question to you again is, so you do some biblical work, and I'm really interested in this field in particular, whether it's like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and the other faiths, because I truly believe that, especially nowadays in 2017 and beyond, this faith, this how can I say this? I mean, you get my point, right? Like this faith factor has to play some role when we talk about leadership, management, strategy, you name it, right? And I see this, and by the way, I'm at the QIPS department, the Quality Improvement Patient Safety, which is a really, let me say this, like it's like a department that touches, I think, I mean, I would have to say this. So I'm an employee here, but like I believe like really one of the reasons why I accepted this job is and relocated from Jeddah to Riyadh, leaving my family, is that I believe that strongly that it touches every aspect, every corner of the Ministry of Health, and we're working on the privatization with the switching from a plan to another, from a system to another. So it's just like a long story. But let me just tell you about the second question. Maybe you can answer both of them at once or separately. It's up to you.
Sure.
So the second question, sir. Your book, I see it, is called How to Fail as a Leader. It looks a very interesting book. I will have to check it out.
Sure.
But I'm sure we say like here, صدرك مفتوح, like your the verbatim translation is that your chest is open, meaning that you will get my question without any offense, without nothing. So I'll just go ahead and throw that question onto you. So I read a lot about management books, leadership, strategy, execution, and so forth. As a matter of fact, just to make the question short, I continuously keep up with the Wall Street Journal bestsellers and also the New York Times. So I'm not saying that I read all of them, but I just those books that that are sold a lot or more than others. So the question straight to you, Mr. Scott, is that so your lecture, I enjoyed it. I'll be frankly honest with you. There are some things that you put it differently than those other people. So I was able to get some new stuff, and I'm did you guys say like a heavy reader, I read a lot, right? They would say يقرأ بنام here, right? You eat the books. So if I would ask you this question, Mr. Scott, if there was one thing, just one single thing about your work, or let's say about this book, that's different from all those other books that are continuously, popping up and with different names. You know what I mean, right? I mean, I'm not saying that all of the books are repetitive. Exactly. Exactly. I'm not saying that all of the books that are published on a yearly basis are repetitive, but you do agree with me, I believe.
Oh yes,
many of them are. So if there's something about the Swoz work or his book that you feel proud that you thought deeply about, maybe at night, maybe somewhere while you were working, and they just put it in the book, what would that thing be? So basically the spiritual part in leadership / management, and then the distinguishing factor about Mr. Scott's work.
Excellent.
And sorry for the
no, it's worth. Thank you for your questions. So I'll tackle both. The first, the faith. So yes, I think similarly, as a man whose faith has been a big part of my life, I'll tell you, there's multiple things. We could have a long conversation about this, but back to remember what I said, people care about why, the bigger picture, how are we tapping into the world? There is, I believe, something deep and profound and I think spiritual at the heart of all of us. And when you, as a leader, can tie what you're doing to the biggest, deepest questions, when people can see how what you're doing makes a difference in the biggest possible way. And I think these get into the biggest story, if you will, to kind of use some language around, like it's faith can be kind of described as a story describing what is true and what is making sense and where the world has been and where the world is headed. That biggest story of all, that grand narrative, that is what I think we most crave. And so the organizations that tap into that, the leaders that tap into that, tap into the deepest driving parts of the world. For good and for ill, most of the grand movements in the world and most extreme behaviors of humans have been tied back to their faith. You want to get big action from your people, answer the big questions, and tie what you're doing to the biggest things. I'll make one other comment on this. So studying Jesus, for example, or other faith leaders, one of the lessons I've learned is that, man, I think what I would call pure leadership often happens in these religious nonprofit settings, because very rarely in that situation, and all the faiths you talked about that I've spent time and studied, you don't pay your people to show up for prayer time, right? Like there's not like a salary and a performance evaluation and you're going to get promoted and get the extra money, or we're going to dock your pay. Like, it has to be pure motivation. You have to purely tap into why this matters. And so you want to look at people who have succeeded, you want to look at ultimate leadership. Then I often find, while I live and work with businesses as the vast majority of what I do, some of the best lessons have come from people who are not businesses, because they don't have the blunt levers, the kind of raw material of money and promotions to motivate people. So there's a lot to learn from faith. And so, yeah, I strongly recommend checking out any and all of those things. Now, I've not read the book you mentioned. It sounds interesting. Sounds like I need to look that one up myself. I love reading as well, but I have not read that particular